Cool. Hey, man, this is Stevie Rachelle from Tuff. I'm the lead singer. And when we come down to Australia, original bassist and co-founder Todd Chason will be on the bass. Our drummer is Todd T. Burr, and Billy Morris plays lead guitar for us. Billy used to play with the late, great Janie Lane and Warrant for many years. And we're all stoked to come down to Glam Fest. It'll be my second time coming to Australia. I've previously played Melbourne and Sydney, but thrilled to add Brisbane and Adelaide to the itinerary. And a week from today we'll be landing in Brisbane, and then obviously it's off to the races with all of us. So can't wait.
Oh yeah, mate. Thanks for joining us today, Stevie. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Same here, Kris.
The lineup for Glam Fest, mate, it's pretty extensive. You got yourselves. There's Wednesday 13, Faster Pussycat, Enuff Z Nuff, Eclipse, Pretty Boy Floyd, and the local supports. But have you actually toured with many of those bands before?
I've known Steve from Pretty Boy Floyd and his band since day one. Since before their first gig, we were all hanging out on the Sunset Strip. Same applies for Taney and Faster Pussycat. I moved to LA in June of '87 and joined Tuff a couple weeks later. Faster Pussycat was already a band and had been signed, but I don't think their record had come out yet. And then Enuff Z Nuff came out in '89, and when they were on tour and played Southern California, Tuff did open up for Enuff Z Nuff a couple times during their debut tour. So I've known Chip since the beginning, or at least since their record came out, even though they're from Chicago, which for people in Australia that don't know, like, Chicago's 2,500 miles away from LA. And ironically, I'm originally from Wisconsin, which Wisconsin is just north of Chicago. So if you leave Chicago and you drive north, in less than 1 hour, you're in Wisconsin and almost to Milwaukee. Right. And then you go another hour and change north. I'm from a small town called Oshkosh, which is between Green Bay and Milwaukee. But that's where I'm originally from, the Midwest. And then I came to LA in '87 to join Tuff. As far as Wednesday 13 is concerned, I didn't know him back in the day. He was a little kid. He came to Tuff shows, and he told me this. The first time he was a fan of Tuff, he read about us in Metal Edge, and he came to a club when he was like 15 or 16. He wasn't old enough to get in, but he went with his girlfriend, and their grandma drove them to the club. Wow. And he waited in the parking lot. When we got off the tour bus, he came up to us.
Wow, that is fantastic.
Yeah, so he told me that like 10, 15 years after the fact, when he was in the Murder Dolls, we had connected online, and then when he came to LA, we went to dinner and hung out, and he invited me to a show. But yeah, it's funny. I've heard other stories like that over the years of guys that were in bands that got famous. John Five, who's now in Motley Crue, he grew up locally, but he had sent me a message just in the last few months and said, "Hey, I used to go see your band, when I was like 17 years old." So John Five used to drive up from Orange County to the Strip and see bands. And yeah, it's always interesting to hear stories from other guys and other bands that, would come and see us. Like the band Lit. I'm sure you're familiar with Lit because I think they're pretty big down in Australia. They used to come to our shows all the time. And I first met Jeremy, the guitarist, when he was probably 15 years old, and AJ, his little brother, was 13, and following his bigger brother around on the Strip, handing out flyers for Jeremy's first band. And then, then at some point years later, they, go through some changes and get a record deal and go double platinum. And, they're still friends of mine to this day as well. So it's always cool to hear, these stories or see guys that I've known since the beginning and see them have success.
That's so cool. And then I love the way that the organizers Silverback have mixed the bands up too. Like you got the more hard rock punk sounds of Wednesday 13s to go with like the obvious glam of bands like yourself and Faster Pussycat. So how important is it to have that diversity on a festival lineup, do you think?
Well, I do agree, because Eclipse is obviously not from the States, even they're Swedish. I don't know how old that band is, meaning I think they've been around for 5 or 7 years, give or take. I could be wrong. And I'm guessing they're a little younger than us. But they've definitely fit in. Like I know they were on the Monsters of Rock cruise, and every time there's a cruise, there's probably 40 bands on those. And I know that it was at least one or two cruises where I could not stop hearing people talk about Eclipse.
Yeah, right.
People like, oh my God, this band Eclipse is amazing. They're great. I love this band. So I've heard a lot of really good things about them, even though I've never seen them. And I don't remember meeting them or hanging out with them, but I know they got great reviews on the cruise. A lot of people really liked them. And they're not exactly a hair band, and they're not, complete 80s glam rock. Then again, neither is Tuff. At this point, it's 30 some years later. And we definitely had our Poison-esque Motley Crue early era glam phase, but at some point we kind of progressed and got, I think that when everything cessed out in the wash, we're a little bit more metal. We're a little bit more harder, and I think people will see that when they come to see us live. We're not Pantera, but we're not as soft as Unskinny Bop and the original Poison. There's a little bit more grit to us, I think. So I think it is a good mix. Enuff Z Nuff's got a very psychedelic kind of vibe. They got the psychedelic glam thing going on. And Steve and Pretty Boy Floyd, they've stuck to their guns as far as doing their very Motley Crue style of sleaze glam rock. So, but I can't wait. And I don't know a lot about the Australian bands, but it's like you said, there's a good mix. You got 3 of our bands are from the Strip: Faster Pussycat, Tuff, and Pretty Boy Floyd, all of us from that scene. Enuff Z Nuff, obviously from Chicago. Wednesday grew up in the Carolinas, which is, far East Coast. And then you got your Australian bands, which I don't know where everybody's from, but I know Sisters Doll has been around for a while, and they've toured with some other acts and built a little bit of a brand for themselves. And then you got some local bands that are supporting: Cassidy Paris and Star Crazy, Atomic Riot, Department of Gloom. I'm trying to remember everybody. Catalano, is that what they're called?
Yeah, they're great. Catalano, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. It's a pretty brutal tour when you look at it too, bro. Like you got 4 shows over 4 cities, 4 days. It's like they're not really leaving you much time to settle in, are they?
Well, somebody else asked me that as well. And that's a misconception that a lot of people don't always understand, and when I say that, like, people go, oh my God, I wish I was in a band. Oh, it must be so great. Like what they see, and I'm taking us back to MTV era videos. Like people would see the Bon Jovi video or the Poison video or the Motley Crue video. They're on stage, backstage. There's all kinds of girls, the tour bus, everyone's drinking beer, everyone's having a blast. The show itself is really an hour. If you're an opening band, it's 30 or 40 minutes. If you're a headliner, maybe 90 minutes or 2 hours. But there's another 22 or 23 hours in a day. And to get to that hour on stage, there's so many moving parts, and it is moving parts because, like you just said, we're going to fly into Brisbane, land on Tuesday. So we'll be in Brisbane on Tuesday. We play Brisbane on Wednesday. Early Thursday morning, we get up and fly to Melbourne, play Melbourne Thursday night, get up early Friday morning, fly to Adelaide, play Adelaide Friday night, get up early Saturday morning, fly to Sydney, play Sydney Saturday night. Sunday morning, we're going to have breakfast. And by 10 o'clock, we'll be on our way to the airport to fly home. So it's really only a week, not even 5-6 days. And yeah, we're going to be on the move. But when you compare it to back in the day, I've done a thing on Metal Sludge that I post called the Tuff Diaries. And I talk about what it was like being in Tuff for that decade. We did tours that were 8 or 9 weeks, 40 shows, 5 in a row, 1 off, 3 in a row, 2 off, 6 in a row, 1 off, 4 in a row, 1 off, 5 in a row, 2 off, 3 in a row, 1 off, 6 in a row, 1 off. I mean, not for a week, not for 2 weeks, not for a month, like 2 months, 9 weeks, 10 weeks. And that's where you really separate, you know, as they say, the men from the boys, because it can start to weigh on you, you know, because it's not just the gig. You're dealing with climate change, you know, and when you're touring in different parts, you know, food, and you know, sometimes it's currency in Europe. You're going from country to country to country, and so yeah, there is a lot of moving parts, and you know, this will be it will be grueling though, because I did see Chris Jericho from Fozzy, who just posted, you know, they just went down there and did that run with Buck Cherry, which was also a Silverback production. And Chris on the plane, on the way there, he posted, he's like, I'm on my way to Australia, and he's all excited and happy. And then on the way home, he's in his chair like, oh my God. And he said that they logged 55 hours of flying.
Wow, yeah, it's a pretty big country.
Because it's 15 plus getting there. That's 30 round trip. And then every day, you know, every airport and a couple hours here and in and out. And but yeah, it'll definitely be tugging at us a little bit at some point.
It'd be fun though. So we go back in time a bit, man. Like Tuff formed back in 1985, and you joined in 1987. So what was the early days like for Tuff, and where did you fit into the music scene back then?
Well, you know, that scene on the Sunset Strip, you know, I've been asked about it, you know, many times. That whole scene was like something that will probably never be replicated again. You know, I guess kind of like what the late 70s punk scene was in New York with the CBGBs, you know, and or what was, you know, the English punk movement in the 70s with the Clash and all those kind of bands over there. But the Sunset Strip was a sight to behold. And, you know, Tuff was a part of that equation. And when we got there, Poison had just exploded. You know, when I just joined the band, Poison had only really been a name recognition band nationally for maybe 6 months. And the day I was on the Strip, Axl Rose was standing in front of Gazzari's. I didn't know who he was. He was talking to some people, and I remember he had a deep voice, and he was talking there. People were congratulating him on the record that was about to come out because it wasn't out yet. And I said to the guys, I said, who is that? And they said, oh, that's Axl from Guns N' Roses. And of course, you know, now in today's world, he's an icon. Yeah. He's a legend. You know, I mean, the whole band, Slash and him and Duff, I mean, what they created is otherworldly. But in 1987, those were just 5 dirtbag guys that got a record deal.
True.
You know, who were playing the Troubadour in front of 200 people and played other shows in front of 10 people. So nobody could have said, well, yeah, they're going to put out their debut record. It's going to sell 20 million copies. And then the follow-up is going to be, you know, 2 double records that are going to sell 7 and 8 million copies each. Like, nobody could have predicted that. Even with Poison, nobody could have predicted that they would sell 2, 3, 4 records, double, triple, quadruple platinum, back to back to back to back, because they too were just 4 long-haired dudes who liked Van Halen and listened to Loverboy and Foreigner, and then said, we're going to call ourselves Poison, you know, and wrote some songs and played the clubs and handed out flyers and chased the dream, and eventually it happened. So Tuff was one of those bands. However, we fell a little bit shorter than Poison and Guns N' Roses did, let's be honest. You know, 35 years later, me and Todd, who were standing in the rehearsal room and working on our songs and saying, let's do this at, you know, the Whiskey Show. And hey, let's get on that show and open up for Leatherwolf or Vinnie Vincent Invasion or Bullet Boys or whoever was coming into town that we had the chance to play with. We wanted to put our foot forward, you know? And so all these years later, for Tuff to be a part of the equation from the Sunset Strip that still gets some recognition and to be included in Glam Fest to come down to Australia, I couldn't be more thrilled. You know, very honored, very fortunate, and very much looking forward to it, you know?
And you came into the band for Jim, who sung on the debut 4-track demo, Knock Yourself Out. So at that point, mate, like, were you encouraged to bring your own voice and personality to the band, or did they sort of more give you direction they wanted you to go in?
Well, And you know, when you say Jim, you know who Jim is, correct?
No.
Jim is Jim Gillette from Nitro.
Okay.
You remember the band with the high screams?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was their original singer, Jim Gillette. He was their singer, but he went by Jimmy Lamore, which was his stage name.
Right.
But yeah, so their original singer, you know, at that point was Jim Gillette. He wanted to go heavier. He wanted to do more screams and more power metal style music, like, you know, Nitro became kind of that, you know, mixture of like Pantera and King Diamond or something. They didn't want to do that. They wanted more of what they call, you know, like party rock, what Van Halen was, or Motley Crue, or Rat, you know. So, and that's kind of what I was doing in Wisconsin when I was playing around in my couple local bands. And then when they were looking for a singer, I found out about it through a friend who had been to LA to visit the Strip, the clubs, and he came home with a flyer that basically said wanted lead singer. And it was a picture of George, the guitarist, the picture of Todd, the bassist, the picture of Michael, the drummer, and then it was an open box, and it said wanted lead singer, you know, and then it said influences, you know, David Lee Roth, Van Halen, Vince Neil, Motley Crue, Robin Zander, Cheap Trick, Bret Michaels, Poison, Billy Idol, you know, like they wanted a blonde hair rock and roll frontman. And I looked at that and I was like, that's me, you know, because when I was playing locally in Wisconsin, I love a lot of people, you know, at that point, 84, 85 were like, oh, Steve thinks he's David Lee Roth, you know, and that was like, Steve thinks he's Vince Neil, you know. So I was, you know, those were, you know, my two of my earliest influences, David Lee Roth and Van Halen, and Vince Neil and Motley Crue. So that's kind of what I was kind of becoming, you know. I was kind of honing my craft, listening to those records and being that kind of a frontman. So when they were looking for that, I was like, I'm the guy. I plugged right in, you know. It wasn't like they had to go like, hey, do this, bleach your hair. My hair was already blonde, you know, like be more like this guy. It was like, I was already trying to be like David Lee Roth, you know. So, you know, I was essentially the missing piece, you know. And then when I joined, we played our first show with Warrant 6 weeks later. And, you know, at that point, Warrant was the big band in town. And we just followed right in their footsteps, you know, and then they got signed, and then we became kind of the big cheese. And of course, you know, in the midst of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other bands, but we definitely had something magical was happening. And that's kind of why we rose to the top then. And I guess why we're still somehow involved today.
Yeah, sure. So over the years, mate, like the music world's seen a lot of changes. So have Tuff sort of more changed and evolved to keep up with the changes in the music world, or have you sort of more followed your own path the whole time?
Well, you know, by the time we put out our record, we got signed in 90. And I was already in the band for 3 years. And Todd and George and Michael had already been doing the band for a couple years. And, you know, me, myself, I was playing around locally in my bands, you know, 6, 7 years earlier as well. And of course, like I said, all of our influences were the Van Halens and the Rats and the Motley Crues. So by the time we got a record deal, everybody was like, oh my God, another guy with blonde hair, another guy with a headband, another guy with a BC Rich guitar with a hockey stick headstock, or another guy with a colorful drum set with double bass, and another bright logo behind the drums. And so we were definitely following in the footsteps of what preceded us. But by that point, as we all know now, it started wearing thin. You know, people are like, you know, there's Bang Tango and Bang Gang and Bullet Boys and Dangerous Toys and Pretty Boy Floyds. And, you know, the names were kind of running together, and the stage names were running together. And even when I joined, I was Steve. My real name is Steven. And Michael was like, well, there's Steven Tyler and there's Stephen Piercy. Maybe, you know, there's Steve Stevens, and maybe you should be Stevie. You know, he was the one who suggested I should be Stevie. And the only Stevies were like Stevie Ray Vaughan, Stevie Nicks, or Stevie Wonder. And all three of them had nothing to do with, you know, our style of music. So I was like, I'll be this, you know, I'm Stevie, you know. But But, you know, like I said, by the time we got signed and started to really make our, you know, put our foot in, everyone was like, oh, it's another Van Halen wannabe. Oh, they want to be Warrant or Motley Crue or Poison. And, you know, getting tagged like that in some ways was good because people like, I really like Van Halen. I really like Poison. Well, I really like them too. But then the people were like, oh my God, another guy that sounds like that or looks like that or another. Of course, everybody did that. You look at a magazine or you see the band, he looks like Nikki Sixx. He looks like Jakey Lee. He looks like Zakk Wylde. Like everybody kind of, they put you, as they say, in a pigeonhole before you can do it yourself.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, he must, you know, they must be exactly like Poison because he kind of looks like the singer from Poison. So they're exactly like Poison. They're a ripoff, you know. At some point, I think after time, we did start to find a little bit of our own identity, but by then it was too late, you know, because now, you know, the grunge thing happened and you had Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Nirvana, and everything was completely anti the bleach blonde lead singer, the headbands, the leather pants, the big drum sets, the shiny guitars. None of that was no longer cool, you know. Suddenly, like, guys were having dreadlocks and long beards and, you know, big baggy shorts. And at one point it looked like there was more roadies playing on stage than band members, you know? And so if you had that look that we had in 88, 89, 90, it was by that point, it kind of went against it. So by our follow-up record, Fist First, Religious Fix, things were a little harder, a little darker, a little thicker, you know. And I guess the same could be, you know, described for Skid Row. They went from 18 in Life, I Remember You, to Slave to the Grind, Monkey Business, In a Darkened Room, you know. And it progressively, as hard as they were, they still had that poppy element. Can't Stand the Heartache, and some of those songs were very melodic. But by the second record, it was way heavier. And by the third record, it was not only heavier, but it was darker. And we kind of had to follow a little bit in that footstep. Just, I think we couldn't escape it, you know, kind of influenced by it. You know, we weren't gonna still come out wearing cowboy boots and glittery headbands in 1994 because, you know, what you looked like in 88 was not going to work in 94. So we had to kind of adjust a little bit, you know.
Yeah, cool. Oh, Stevie, well, thanks very much for your time today, mate. Tuff will be here in Australia starting January 25 for Glam Fest in Brisbane before going to Melbourne, Adelaide and Sydney, finishing on January the 28th, mate. So I look forward to seeing you at the Brisbane show.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And to all the fans, is this going to be a video interview?
No, I'll just put the audio. I'll do the video if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, you can do whatever you want, chop it up.
Yep.
But, you know, to all the fans listening, whether you're coming to one of the shows, two of them, or all of them, I not only speak for myself, but my band, and I know some of the other guys, all those guys I've been friends with, we're all stoked to come down, you know, to bring all these bands, you know, represent the Sunset Strip with Tammy and Faster Pussycat, Steve and Pretty Boy Floyd, myself and Todd with Tuff, Chip, obviously, and Enuff Z Nuff, Wednesday 13, and then Eclipse from Sweden. We're all stoked to do this. It's great. Silverback bringing us all is a good thing. And as many people I've read online said, I can't believe all these bands are coming to Australia together. We're the same way. You know, we can't believe it either. But a week from today, you know, we'll be in Brisbane and getting ready for the first show next Wednesday. And we'll be there every night after. So, you know, come and say hi. Thrilled, stoked, can't wait to be there.
Beautiful, Steve. Well, you take care of yourself until then, mate, and we'll see you in Brisbane in a week.
Thank you, sir, very much.
No worries, buddy. Have yourself a good day.
Okay, buddy, you too.
Yeah.